We're going to bring up our next guest speaker now. He's a really acclaimed and respected industry analyst, a consultant. Nick Patience, he's a co-founder of 451 Research. He's been spending a lot of time lately researching AI and machine learning. We thought we'd bring him up to kind of talk about what that means for content management and make sense of it for us. So Nick, welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Before you get started, I got to ask you a question. I think a lot of our audience hears all this stuff and maybe feels like they're not as far along with AI or machine learning as they read in the market. And what would you say to that?
I'd say they don't need to worry yet. The applications I see tend to be quite narrow and quite application specific and task specific. So there's not organizations being completely transformed using AI yet. That's just not happening. But I wouldn't wait. I wouldn't set obstacles in front of using it. I wouldn't wait. And maybe in 3 or 4 years' time, there will be those organizations, but we're not there yet.
That's a good start.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Fred. So as you said, I'm Nick Patience, one of the founders of 451 Research. We're a technology industry analyst company based in New York. I've actually been looking at this area of machine learning for 20 years. A very lonely space back 20 years ago, I can assure you. There was not much interest aside from federal government and large universities. But I just wanted to just give you a few high-level thoughts, quick flyby, to sort of give you some things to think about as we go through this track and also through enterprise world this year. So I'm going to look at what I see going on in work, in data or information, and in AI and machine learning. So just starting with work. There's some fundamental shifts going on, and I think there's a case to be made that work isn't actually working the way it's supposed to work, as it were. We all know the demographic shifts that are happening, but there's a lot more to it than that. There's a lot of technology issues around. We do a lot of surveys. We do 250 end user surveys a year of our end user survey base, and we found things such as this, such as fewer than 4 in 10 feel very productive at work. Only 9% say the work itself is the best thing about the job. There's obviously lots of other reasons people go to work, but that's a very low number when you think about how much time people actually spend doing their job. 37% said they spent a lot of time, so more than a third, in instant messaging and email. Now, obviously, that is work to a certain extent, but that's a lot of time. And some of that time could be spent doing some things that are more productive. And only 35% are satisfied with the application mix provided to them by their organization. Again, obviously, people are working, using technology in every single aspect of their lives now, and work is just one of them. But they bring that experience they have outside work into work and wonder why things are not necessarily working quite as smoothly as they would do in their daily lives. It leads to a few friction points. It leads to technology friction points, ineffective search, siloed information. It leads to productivity friction, where repetition happens and manual error creeps in a lot. And weak execution, context switching constantly. Working in different contexts throughout the day can be quite tricky. And this all leads to a kind of strategic debt, the difference between what the company strategy would like to be and what it actually turns out to be in daily life. And that can often lead to low morale and staff turnover and things like that. So there's a lot of process improvements. There's a lot of other things we need to do to change work. And I think technology such as content management, content services, search, analytics, all these kind of good things are absolutely key to this. And one of the reasons they're key to this is because of data, or I'm open text, we call it information, or content, obviously. It has multiple names. One of our surveys here, we ask people how many of your decisions, or what percentage of your decisions are data-driven, and in just 6 months, we see 84% goes to 91%. And I see this across. I look at a lot of areas of the software industry, but I see this going on an awful lot. And we heard earlier about the culture change in the museums and things like that. And I'm seeing a lot of companies wanting to instill a data-driven culture in their organization. I'm sure some of you here are seeing the same thing. And that does require culture change. And culture change can be difficult to do, but I see it happening a lot. And one of the reasons is obviously the explosion in unstructured data. We've heard a lot about it already, and given I'm open text, I don't need to explain to you what it is. You'll live it every day. You have repositories of it all over the place. But that's the key element in this. In the explosion in data, but in the use of machine learning is being driven in part because of the realization of what's going on in large volumes of unstructured data. So this is an example of where people tell us this is where they're seeing their unstructured data growth coming from business documents, obviously, but from emails and attachments, but medical images and digital images, and even the actual machine learning data sets used to train their machine learning models is causing an explosion. But just to go back a second, but what it is documents, it is emails, but it's increasingly the way we communicate. Now, if you're fortunate enough to be, as it says in the bars, if you're fortunate enough to look as if you're 25, or you have children who are teenagers onwards, you know how they communicate. They don't communicate in documents. They don't communicate in email unless you force them to read it. They communicate in images and videos and in text. Now, obviously, we're not going to completely transform the workplace I was talking about earlier, so everybody's just going to be sending emojis and Snapchats to everybody. That's not going to happen. But they do have certain ways of doing it, and they have a large amount of resistance to using email. And so this is not just an esoteric technology conversation. This is actually how we communicate as humans. And so we can think about documents and things like that, but we also need to think about all the images that we have in organizations, but also how we're going to store what is actually produced by our employees, not just in the future, I mean now. There are issues with data volumes, and I'm sure you know, if anybody here works for companies that are reasonably 5, 10, 15, even 100 years old, you can see often the value of the information sometimes, not always in the case of obviously museums, but the value of the information can decline, but the cost and the risk of it doesn't. So the cost of storing more and more information obviously goes up, and the more and more information that exists, the more potential for risk. And this is where information governance comes in. And if not done properly, it can have various consequences, one of which is the higher cost of storing information, increased exposure to risk, not knowing what actually is on that server or in that cloud repository, can have bad consequences, especially if you've gone through, let's say, a lot of mergers and acquisitions in financial services sector or something like that. There's a lot of stuff lying around that could potentially be dangerous. And also, if you're talking about e-discovery situations, it's another area where higher cost and risk comes in. Competitive disadvantage, making you less nimble, and also spending a lot of this this amount of money on simply storing information rather than doing anything with it, money that could be spent elsewhere. And lost revenue, leading to lack of loss of IP or loss of opportunity to actually create new products out of existing legacy information. And then there's a whole other thing going on, which I'm sure you're very well aware of in the regulations. There are dominoes falling here. So GDPR came into effect just over a year ago. California has done its own Privacy Act, Brazil, Argentina, Japan. They're all kind of recognizing, and I live in Europe, but I spend a lot of time in North America as well. The countries and in China as well, they're realizing that GDPR is probably going to be the standard for this thing. There'll be variations within it. But the European Union spent an awful lot, many years crafting this thing. And so we're seeing this is happening all over the world. And so I think it's something we need to be highly cognizant of. And then finally coming to my pet subject, as it were, AI and machine learning. This is how I think about it at a very high level. It may prompt you to think about how it works inside your organizations. So machine learning is really good at automating the mundane. So highly repetitive tasks done, fairly low-value tasks. You might have heard of technology such as robotic process automation, which kind of handles some of this stuff. That's part of it. Another area is automating the complex. So self-driving cars will get here. That's great. And it is a really interesting market. And that is something that will affect us all as consumers eventually. But in terms of what we're thinking about here, it's not that relevant. But what is relevant is augmenting humans to do everything else. So all the kinds of work that we do across all of our organizations here and beyond, that's where machine learning can help. And this is, I'm part of here, I guess, of the automation section. This is fundamental to intelligent automation. And I'm sure you know how this works, but how does machine learning actually unlock insight? So you're taking unstructured data, you can extract key elements out of it, turn it into a structured format, which then can be used by any other application. And then it can kick off business processes. We heard earlier about that. And that's a key. It sometimes can feel a bit amorphous, but I know OpenText obviously is heavily involved in both the business process side and the content services side. And I think we're seeing this is not just a case of understanding what you've got on a hard drive. This is what can that information then kick off in terms of a process inside the organization. Just a few quick examples. In the legal industry, obviously, OpenText is very involved in the e-discovery industry and legal industry in general. Machine learning has been used, and I actually worked for a company that subsequently got bought by OpenText a few years ago in this area. We saw back in 7 or 8 years ago a lot of resistance from lawyers to using machine learning driven analytics to get these piles of evidence down to something that's manageable. So taking a massive pile, putting it through either a neural network or a shallow machine learning algorithm and getting it down to just a few thousand documents or a few hundred documents versus 800,000, 1 million documents. But now it's been accepted inside that industry, more or less. I mean, it's happened quite quickly in an industry that you think is fairly conservative. Compliance means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But like the legal example, it's a lot of people looking at stuff and making decisions. A large portion of that can be automated using machine learning. And then media asset analysis. This is kind of a similar example to the museums. I'm seeing a lot of media companies, I mean in any sense, that have, especially the ones that are 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, have a lot of assets that have been lying around dormant that they know are there, but they can't do anything with because it's too manually intensive to sift through and find that particular video of that particular person scoring that particular goal in that particular game. And now they can do that, and they are doing that, and they're monetizing it on Instagram and areas like that, and YouTube. This is creating brand new revenue streams out of existing content, and it can be done now with machine learning and driven content services. So in summary, that was a quick flyby of what I think about. Work is changing, and the systems that support it need to change too. The data-driven culture I talked about is spreading, and it's something that you should think about inside your organization. How data-driven are you? And the sprawl has been a problem for years. We've known about this, but it's creating actual real risks. And GDPR and its offspring, as it were, are going to really force the issue there. And I think the only way really long-term to tackle this is via AI and machine learning. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.